Hello, everyone, and welcome to Cinema Regulars. I am Isaac, and it is the end of 2023. 2023 has ended. Welcome 2024. And I am going to be ranking my top 10 favorite movies that I have seen in theaters this year. If you haven't seen Kellan's recording of his top 10, here are the rules that we set for our top 10, the ones that are allowed to be on this list. You want to take a look at those now with them on screen. Without further ado, here are my top 10 movies of 2023. So, and coming in at the number 10 slot, this one was a little hard for me to place. I went with the D&D movie, Honor Among Thieves. This movie perfectly encapsulated what it's like to play D&D. The characters were funny. It wasn't like they made a movie solely set in the D&D universe, which they could have very easily done. The characters actually feel like they interact with each other in a way that people who are playing D&D would interact with each other. And like just some of the funny things that happen in the movie are perfect like representations of what happens, and it was so much fun to experience that with other people. My number 9, it's a recent movie, it's the first one that we have on the podcast, is The Shift. Angel Studios has been absolutely knocking it out of the park this year. And this movie is no exception to that. Like, it is the way that they told it was great. I mean, if you want a full breakdown of my thoughts on this movie, you can link to the podcast episode we did on this. But the way that they did a sci-fi action movie that is a retelling of an actual book in the Bible, and they do a pretty good job of doing it without it also feeling like every other religious movie that's out there. I feel like the fact that they took this chance and made this movie to draw in a newer crowd to the religious movie genre was just, it was a bit of a gamble, but I think it really paid off and they did a very good job. And I just feel like this movie hit me in a pretty good way. Moving on from that, from one religious movie to another, in my number 8 spot, I am putting in Jesus Revolution. It's hard to explain how this movie made me feel because it stirred so many emotions in me. Just an insanely quick synopsis. It was about the spiritual awakening in the little un-PC way of saying hippies in the 70s. This movie is in my top 10 really for a specific scene in the movie because I was raised Catholic, so I was baptized when I was a baby. So I never really understood the power of baptism for people that choose to be baptized. And this movie had a baptism scene in it that completely floored me, and it changed the way that I saw that process and the emotions that people go through when they see that, when they go through that. And it actually made me decide to get baptized again in the church that I am at now. So this movie deserves a spot in my top 10 for that reason. Moving on to my number 7 spot, is The Last Voyage of the Demeter. Now, this movie is bar none in my opinion, the best Dracula movie ever made. It is without a doubt the coolest Dracula movie I have ever seen. And the fact that it's based on the actual book and not even the whole book, just a single chapter in the book floored me. And this one of the biggest things that I was impressed with this movie is not well, besides all the cinematography and the aesthetics, is just how much you got to see Dracula in the movie. Because 90% of horror monster movies you see nowadays, you only see little like shadows of the monster, and you don't really get a good look at them until one scene where they blow the entire CGI budget of the movie. But this movie went all out and absolutely did not hold back with showing Dracula. They did not pull any punches when it came to it, and I really respect them for that. Plus, the expectations you have going into the movie are kind of subverted by the end of it, because if you've read Dracula, it changes, like, you know how it ends. And I feel like even so, even knowing how the movie ends, it still gets you, and it's just a very good movie. Moving on to my number 6 spot is Spider-Man Across the Spider-Verse. I'm a huge Spider-Man fan. Just a big Spider-Man guy. Like, I love Spider-Man. And this movie is no exception to my love of Spider-Man. This movie was immaculately well done, just as, if not more, visually stunning than the first one. The character development in the movie was done very, very well, and all of the Easter eggs and stuff in the movie were done very subtly for some, not so subtly for others, but for the most part, like, you could watch this movie 5 different times and notice something new about it every time. And the way that the amount of different art styles they used to represent each individual universe was done very, very well. And at no point during this movie did I feel like the art styles clashed too much, which is an incredible feat for for a movie like this to accomplish. But they did it very, very well, and I was very, very done with it. Would have been a little higher up on my list, but there were some things about it I didn't like. But for the most part, it's a pretty solid spot on my top 10. Moving on to my number 5 is Puss in Boots: The Last Wish. This movie was one of the first movies that we saw this year, and it has maintained a spot in my top 10 since the beginning of the year. Like, it has been it was such a good movie. We saw it twice. One time it was for free. Like, it's such a good movie that I've actually watched it 2 more times on my own since we've seen it in theaters. The art style of this movie and the pacing and the character development were all immaculately well done. The fact that they had 3 villains in this movie, and at no point did it feel that they were crowding up the screen, is an incredible feat to accomplish, and they did it so well, because all of the villains had their own unique aspects to them that you could you could focus on each one as you watch the movie. And they did like, I could gush over and over about this movie, but I don't have a whole lot of time. I do. The one thing I definitely have to say is that this is like the start of a renaissance for DreamWorks that I am absolutely 100% here for. Moving on to my number 4 spot, almost to the top 3, is the movie Talk to Me. Now, this movie, I was stunned by this movie. It it hit me so hard. Like out of all the horror movies, like I'm a big horror movie guy. Like I love a good horror movie. And this movie was it's hard to put into words this movie because there's so much visceral things that happen in this movie and I don't want to talk too much about them because I don't want to spoil those for anyone who would go and see this because it the amount of times that I just like hurled back in my seat and just like where a hit would happen, you feel it in your chest and the visual effects that they did. And was it I shouldn't even say visual effects because so many of the effects, almost all of them really were done practically in this movie. And I am a huge fan of practical effects. The supernatural aspect of the movie was just even cooler as well. It was like a Ouija thing, but not really. And I honestly hate Ouija movies at this point because they're just overdone and overplayed. But this was a clever enough spin on it that I think it did a very, very good job. Moving on to my number 3 spot is Godzilla -1. Now me and Kellan had plenty to talk about this movie in our podcast. Go and see it if you want our full thoughts. But this movie, as I like I said about the Dracula movie, this is the best Godzilla movie I have ever seen in my life. And it blew me away. I was floored by this movie. I can honestly say before this movie, I had never thought of Godzilla as a scary thing before. This movie terrified me. Like I was shaking in my seat at how like just the adrenaline that this movie like sent coursing through my body. It was just it was very very high action packed, especially because in a lot of Godzilla movies you don't really see like he shows up for maybe like like 5 to 7 scenes in the movie and the rest of the movie is just talking about human people, but like he was actually in the movie quite a decent amount, and on top of that even the human parts were still very good because it was a very interesting and intricate plot. So this is just I could go on for hours about this movie, but I will just simply say that this was the perfect Godzilla movie and you should absolutely go see it. Moving on to my number 2 spot. Now, this one took a bit of deliberation. I was having a bit of trouble placing my two movies, my top two, but I think I have to put in this spot the movie Nefarious. It is one of only 3 tens that I have given out this year, and the portrayal of a demon in this movie was single-handedly one of the most terrifying iterations of a demon in media I have ever seen, because it wasn't some possessed being making thing like showing these displays of power and like throwing things around a room or setting things on fire. It was simply a being that was talking succinctly and extremely precisely, and also at the same time never actually like using the truth, manipulating the truth to reach its goal. And the fact that the entire movie was also shot almost entirely in one room, yet I was sitting there gripping my seat, and I was literally speechless through most of this movie. Like, normally when I watch a movie, like something'll happen and I'll have like a comment that I can say to the person to beside me. Usually it's usually Kellan, but this movie just had me, it grabbed me by the front of my shirt and it just didn't let go the whole movie. And like I left the theater like stunned at what I had just witnessed. And I have to say it was a very surreal experience to go through. Now, before we move on to my number one movie of the year, some honorable mentions. One of them being the movie His Only Son, yet another movie by Angel Studios, about the story of Abraham's journey to go and sacrifice his son Isaac to the Lord. Uh, was an incredibly well done movie, and especially on the budget that it was given. Like, this movie was given like a nothing budget and they made something beautiful with it. And I absolutely loved it. And I could not recommend pretty much anything that Angel Studios does enough. Another movie for my honorable mentions, and this is more of just, it was extremely fun for me, is The Machine. I am a huge Bert Kreischer fan, and I've watched the videos of him explaining his story of how he got involved with the Russian mafia many times, but this movie was just a lot of fun to go and see. It didn't pull like any punches when it came to action scenes, and it was just a lot of fun. So, moving on to my number one favorite movie of 2023, it is The Whale with Brendan Fraser. Now, it is no secret on the Cinema Regulars podcast. Granted, we haven't really had a lot to talk about him this year, but me and Kellen are both very big fans of Brendan Fraser, and it was this was his big Hollywood return after not acting in movies really at all. He won his first Oscar for his performance in this movie, and he 100% deserved it. This movie floored me. Like, it impacted me in a way that I still don't even fully understand. I the fact that a movie that takes place in one room could have so much emotion and and vulnerability and just just character the character exposure, we'll say. It was so well put together, and the pacing of the movie was just done so well. And I when I left the theater, I literally couldn't speak. Like the emotions that I felt while watching after watching this movie, it was almost like, I don't want to say like an existential dread, but it made me look in at myself in a way that I had never done, and it just it just stunned me. I I literally had no words immediately after. Like normally I go see a movie and I can talk about my thoughts on it immediately after it, but I had to sit and just stew in my feelings for a good like half an hour to an hour after this movie. I I still don't even know what I can't even really describe the feeling that I had. So, on that cheery note, that concludes my top 10 favorite movies of 2023. Uh, we got a lot of stuff we're working on this year coming up. We have our bottom tens that we still have coming out. Uh, gotta get them stinky ones in there. Uh, and then we also have our letterbox accounts that we are starting for this year. Uh, you can go ahead and check those out at Cinema Kellan and Regular Isaac. We'll be putting movies that we are seeing in both in and out of theaters. Go ahead and look forward to those. But until then, that concludes my 2023 best movies list. Here's to a new year and many good movies to watch.